tell us like that. These stories taught us an unbelievable lesson in Kavod HaTorah. Chazal teach us that even Tzichas Chulin Shel Talmidei Chacham and Tzrichen Limud, Zaidi was able to derive the most important lessons from seemingly simple conversations with the Rosh Yeshiva. Zaidi was always learning. Whether he was in the yeshiva or he went to the Daf Yomi, his days were filled with learning. Even if he only had a few minutes, you could always find him sitting on the couch with a sefer. Whenever he would come to our house for Yontif, just as he entered the door, the first question was, you have a Chumash with the Ramban, you have a Mishnayos for me. I remember one time he came to visit us in the mountains. He came to the camps to visit us. You found him sitting next to the car in a chair learning the whole day. We once went on a Chalamaya trip with Zaidi. We went to one of the Civil War battlefields. As we were walking along, he turns to me and he says, Simcha, it's very nice, aber zur Blatt Gemara kommt das nicht. It doesn't come close to a Blatt Gemara. Chazal tell us, in Abaishin Laimei, Zaidi was never embarrassed. In his smicha from the Rosh Yeshiva Zatzal, it says, Per Mapik Margolios. Yet he was never ashamed to sit in a shir with guys the age of his grandchildren. All he wanted to do was to learn Torah. When we learned with him, he was never embarrassed to say, slow down. Everybody who knew Zaidi knew he was quite the gentleman. He greeted everybody with a warm smile. He was always makir toiv. And he always went out of his way to make a kiddush Hashem wherever he was. In this week's parsha, describing the death of Yaakov Avinu, the pasuk says, "Vayigva vayosef el amov." Rashi quotes the Divrei Chazal, Yaakov Avinu lo meis. Yaakov Avinu didn't die. Al Pidrush, the pshat is because Yaakov Avinu's legacy never died. His legacy had a chiyus. My grandfather's legacy of Torah and Midas and Avodas Hashem will also give him a chiyus in this world. May all of us grandchildren be zeicher to live up to this legacy. Mocha Hashem Elokim Dima Me'al Panu.
Representing the children of Chaim Schecter.
Rishus, the Rosh Yeshiva, Schecter Neuberger, Han Halas Yeshiva, Chashav Rabbanu. I wanted to first express my akar satayv to Rav Schecter Neuberger and the yeshiva for insisting on having Levaya for my father here at the yeshiva. For nearly 65 years of my father's life, he lived and breathed in Eretz Yisrael. Just a few weeks ago, Rabbi Oberstein had visited him in the hospital, and although I wasn't there to witness it, I heard that Dad seemed to gain strength just talking about the banquet. Our family is deeply touched that you considered my father as part of your family. I'd like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Jeffrey Cohn for opening their house to my family for the duration of Dad's illness. You gave up your home for my siblings as they came and went at nearly all hours of the day and night for the last 3 months. I wanted to thank Dr. Becker, Dr. Feldman, and Dr. Jacobowitz for the care you gave my father during his illness. You juggled your professionalism, your love of my father, to make sure that my father's last weeks were as comfortable and meaningful for Dad as they could be. We heard from the nurses that Dr. Becker on many occasions commented that we had to provide as much care as possible for Dad, that he would survive the entire medical. Standing with his bedside yesterday will be indelibly etched in our also thank the nurses for care, the caregivers for the grateful. The sage advice of Rabbi Heinemann on Wednesday assured us that Dad said a proper vidoy. And Rabbi Hauer's clarity of halacha and his warmth and understanding made sure that Dad's last day, even his last breaths, were taken as a Torah-observant Jew, Kedusha of Torah. We thank you. Lastly, and most importantly, I would like to thank my father's wife, Dava. Dava, you provided my father a home, a bayis nemun, that he so sorely missed when our mother died. Stopping by the house after shul on Shabbos and seeing Dad at the head of the table making kiddush was so gratifying for me. Your tzidkis, your upbeat personality. I was not surprised when Dad once said to me about you, Chaim, I hit the jackpot. During these past months, you were a rock. Bedside with him at the hospital every day, spending full Shabbos with Dad in the hospital, because where else would an Eshes Chayil spend her Shabbos if not with her husband? The last comment to us after Dad's patir was how you wished you could have had more than 3 years. Father, on behalf of my brother, sister, and myself, I want to ask you from Chila. Please forgive us if we ever showed you a lack of kavod or upset you in any way. Forgive me if I ever sounded exasperated when you called me in the office for the 6th time of the day. Haloi l'mishma asneinu, davin oshenu. Wish it were you could call just once more. My father was born in Montreal in 1923. His father, Eliezer Zev Schecter, was a tailor. Simple man, not a lamdan, but ehrlich beyond a doubt. His mother, Liba Shereshevsky, was a miyuchas for the mishpach of the Aruch HaShulchan. Montreal didn't have a Jewish day school at the time, so Dad attended the Barondine Public High School. An avid athlete, Dad was an excellent skier, and believe it or not, a dancer. It was in 1940 that as a young man, the skier, the dancer, public school student came to Ner Yisrael. Father told us that he wasn't loved by every Rebbe. Most wanted him thrown out of the yeshiva. But the most important Rebbe, the Rosh Yeshiva, who would have been loved him and wouldn't hear of it. The yeshiva's faith was, my father bore fruit, and in 1947, Dad was the valedictorian of the yeshiva's second Chag HaSmicha. He took positions in the rabbinate in Norfolk, Virginia, New Orleans, and again in Norfolk. During that time, he finished his master's degree in philosophy at Tulane University and turned down an acceptance to the nation's oldest law school, the Law School of William and Mary in Virginia. By that time, Dad had found his true calling, that of the rabbinate. In 1946, he married my mother. They had 4 children, my brother Meir, my sister Rachel, Moshe, and myself. The importance of Torah learning was so important to them that when Meir was 10, he was sent to New York to learn the Yeshiva Katana. In 1960, Father started the Hebrew Academy of Tidewater in the hopes that he wouldn't have to send his son Moshe away also. But with Meir in New York, Rachel in a public school, Moshe in a brand new school with very few from children, if any, they decided that it was time to move on. So in 1961, he returned to the yeshiva as Director of Community Relations, a job he retired from when he was 65, but a job he didn't give up until yesterday. You see, the job meant that he was the yeshiva's ambassador to the city of Baltimore. And no one would argue that an ambassador he was until his last breath. In Baltimore, he also served as the part-time rabbi of the Har Tzion Tiferet Israel congregation in Forest Park, and the Arkansas Israel congregation on Rogers Avenue for about 22 years combined. Why the history lesson? Because if you were listening carefully, Dad was multi-talented. He had 2 jobs, rabbi and director of community relations. And with his philosophy degree and hashkafas that he learned in his home in Ner Yisrael, would find work teaching philosophy and world religion at a local university at night. In fact, Dad used to hold down 4 jobs because he was machshiv Torah, and he was meiser nefesh to make sure that his children received a real Torah education. Dad, from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you. We know how hard you worked. But if you were listening, you may even have heard more. Dad was an athlete, and he loved sports of all kinds. He took us to more baseball, basketball, hockey, football, and soccer games than any kid could have hoped for. Back then, hockey games weren't just for watching. At the end of the game, the rink would be open for an open skate, and Dad would sit in the stands while he and I watched Meir, Rachel, Moshe skate on the ice. Don't get me wrong, Dad knew it was Bithel Torah, but he was convinced that these moments were also needed in our upbringing. My brother Moshe told me yesterday that the best thing he did for him was to give him a Yetzer Hara for sports. With so many other Yetzer Haras out there, sports was probably the safest. The story is told about how Rabbi Ruderman once got wind that Bachram were coming to our house on Sunday afternoon to watch a football game. So he called in my father and he said, Yossel, I hear that the boys are watching football games at your house. To which father answered, I'm sure respectfully, at least Rabbi knows where they are. You see, he knew boys would want to see the game, so what better place than a block away from the yeshiva in the home of the member of the Anhala? Certainly that was better than Khalila's sports bar. I can't imagine that Father won that argument. I don't remember whether the crowd of boys ever tailed off either. Summers were reserved for family vacation to Laurentian Mountains north of Montreal. Those were special times, as vacations would be 2 to 3 weeks long, and we got to spend time with our grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. But it also meant fishing. I didn't tell you how Dad loved to fish. Every vacation meant a special fishing trip at the crack of dawn for the older brothers. I suspect my sister went on these fishing trips too, as she was the one who taught me how to bait a hook. But there was also a special little fishing trip for me, the baby of the family. I tell you now that some of those fish stories were true. Though Dad made sure we did fun things growing up, our limud Torah was paramount. My brother Moshe remembered how Dad would take him to a game, but only after he finished his mishnayos later with a bacher in the yeshiva. And while I can't remember the brigade part of the story, I remember the chavrusas and mishnayos from 3rd grade on, the summer limudim for a few hours at TA. Dad, you wouldn't hear of us spending a summer morning in Baltimore if we didn't have a chavrusa until lunch. I still remember the tape you sent the year that I was learning in Eretz Yisrael. First part of the tape discussed my learning, and but a few words, you put everything in perspective when you said, and now, from the mundane to the ridiculous, in sports, as you mindlessly would read a few scores to me. And it was that chashivas of learning that I think made me the most proud of you, and why I hope I'm lucky enough to grow up to be like you. Because on the day after you pseudo-retired from yeshiva, you became its oldest student. You see, you always kept your eye on the ball, on that was important. The pride that I felt when a 10th grader who lived on my block came and asked me whether it was my father who was sitting next to him in Rav Kalman's year, or the pride that I got as Rabbi Fran would talk about his 80-something-year-old Talmud at his annual Truva Drush. David HaMelech said, "Being Gvuros Shmoinim Shana." I once heard a kasha as to why we associate Gvuros with an 80-year-old man. Most 80-year-old men are not strong. The answer I heard is that it was a spiritual Gvuros that David HaMelech referred to, one that can only be attained when you've lived long enough. A special Gvuros that of a greater perspective in how Hashem runs the world and what is expected of us. Most amazingly, we saw that transformation in you. I'd be surprised if you saw or attended 3 games in the last 5 years. Instead, it was a more focused effort on your learning, starting with Mr. Nelkin and Rabbi Shafrin. Daf Yomi became an integral part of the day, as did Roshragi Shir and Rabbi Fran Shir. In Florida, you gave a Kli Yakar and a Neir Chaim Shir on Parshas Shavua. We knew of your love for Eretz Yisrael. Growing up, the newspaper was first scanned for news on Israel. As late as this past Wednesday, you wanted to know what was new in Israel. You sent your daughter there in 1967, just months after the war, and presently have more grandchildren in Eretz Yisrael than in America. There are so many other facets to a father's life that I would like to share, that of his passion for junk food and writing. But I want to conclude my remarks by sharing with you my perspective of a father's relationship with the city of Baltimore. For anyone who would listen, Father would talk about the greatness of the city, the yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshivas, the Rabbi, and its wonderful kehilas and their rabbis, and all the wonderful schools and projects that made Baltimore great. But your anivus would not allow the thought to enter your mind that you were a major part of this. How many people learned more about the Yom Tovim when you would host panels of yeshiva boys on TV in the 60s? Rosh Hashanah brought the meaning of life, Hanukkah the meaning of light, and Pesach the meaning of freedom. How many people did you touch from the pulpit as the rabbi of 2 shuls in Baltimore to the 60s, 70s, and 80s? How many families did you comfort with your kind words of hesped? Just last night, the driver who escorted you back to Levinson's told us about a relationship that he had with you since the 60s, almost 40 years. The numbers must have been staggering. It was you who had the inspiration for Religious Emphasis Week. It was you who ran around posting its flyers in the early years. It was you who dynamically led us in expanding the Siyam Torah to include thousands of participants in this city and around the country. It was you, Father, who greeted every mispal at the end of Shachris with a good morning, have a nice day. Not just because the Mishnah says heaven Mekabel is called Adam B'Sever Panam Yafos, but because you had the Midah of Yaakov Avinu, who felt that even a shepherd was likely to be called Achai, my brother. Everybody was a brother, and for a brother you would move heaven and earth. I just recently heard the story of a young man who remembered how you changed the time for Shachris Minyan in shul so he could daven and get to school on time. Or the story about how you roamed the Reynolds Coliseum during a basketball game to get a minyan for a referee who needed to say Kaddish. Is it surprising that a buffer couldn't get a taxi from Penn Station without the driver asking if you knew Rabbi Schecter? Is it surprising that every time you went to a ball game you were greeted by name by every yashar? I still remember sitting at a baseball game and the owner of the Orioles, at the time Gerald Hoffberger, came over to say hello. He probably wanted some ideas on increasing attendance. You saved those ideas for the important projects like the Siyam. Your Kayach HaDibur was legendary. Who can forget that it was you who stood up for the covetous Shabbos in 1978 when the JCC first wanted to open its doors on Shabbos? Oh, how I could still picture you speaking right now, pulling off your glasses just prior to driving home the point. The boys in yeshiva used to tell me how they would sit with you at the breakfast table just to hear you say, please pass the salt. Kishet Tzadik B'Aliyir, Hu Haida, Hu Ziva, Hu Hadara. He is its glory, its splendor, and its crown. It was you, Father, along with the yeshiva, its Rosh Yeshivas, your good friend, Rabbi Naftali Neuberger. There was you. You too were an institution. You too were part of this great city's history and its glory. And growing up in your shadow was a privilege and an honor. May you be a Mevis Yosher for your Hamana and for the whole Mishpacha.
Say the Kilmali Rachnim, please.
Kilmali Rachamim, Shechein Mamiroinim. Seimnu Chanechayna, Al Kanfei Ashchina. B'malois Kedoshim Utahayrim, Kizoyar Rakia Masirim. Es Nishmas, Rav Yosef, Rav Eliezer Zev, Sholach Li Olamai. Bavur Shemishpachtoi Ve'atzibur Mispalelim, Bi'ad Askoras Nishmasai, B'gan Eden Teim Nuchasai, L'chein Baal Horach, Yasti Reyu, B'seiser Kenafav Li'olamim, V'yitzor B'yitzor Achayim Es Nishmasai, Adonai Hu Nachalosai, Yonuach B'shalom Al Mishkavai, V'noimar Amen.
The Kfura will take place in Rosedale in the Agudah Chalka. Shiva will take place in Clark's Lane Apartments at 3505 Clark's Lane, Apartment B1. Mishpacha asks that Nachman Park in Rabbi Talshul's parking lot. Shachris will be at 7:30, Mincha Mayev at 4:30, Mincha today will be at 3 o'clock. We'd like to ask Einachach Simcha Schecter, Chaim Schecter, Dani Schecter, Barak Schecter, and Yossi Rybeck, and all his nephews to be Nesei Aron. We will be allowed the Aron from the lobby down to the front entrance of the yeshiva.
Put it down and move away. Move back. Move out.
Everyone who's going to the cemetery, please go directly to your cars. We'll place funeral stickers on your cars. Just please stop right by the driveway right here. Quickly.
Bridge.